welcome everyone. Hope everyone's having a lovely morning. And yeah, as Poppy said, today I'm going to be talking about how Animal Rising got 12 national newspaper front pages last year. But rather than just be braggadocious about it and tell you all the good stuff we did, what's really important for me here today is to be talking about how it can be achieved and replicated across the movement. Now, I did want to start by a little bit telling you all about me and my background. So my academic background is in philosophy and theology, and then a master's in religion. You'll probably notice quite quickly that's got absolutely nothing to do with press, journalism, media, and what I'm about to talk about. And that's the first really important thing I'd like to get across to everyone, is that you do not need a degree in journalism, a degree in PR, any training in this sort of thing to be able to learn it and to be able to do it. I don't want people to feel frightened when they think about the press and the media. I want you to have this can-do attitude of thinking, if I put enough effort in, if I learn the right things, I can do this too. So yeah, moving on to last year for Animal Rising is a selection of a few of the front pages and high-profile interviews we delivered. So yeah, 12 national front pages, and this week we got another one from The Sun talking about the Grand National again, which was hilarious because we said very publicly we're not going, but it's great, we'll take it. About 135 live media interviews, including twice on Good Morning Britain, several times on Sky News. We were top news story for 36 hours over the Grand National last year, alongside 19,000 odd online mentions. So all in all, very successful year for us last year. Now, going back to what I'm saying about not having to be an expert in all of this, how did we achieve that? And I firmly believe that we achieve that by doing the basics right, by not getting too complicated, by not being fancy with it, but learning how to do the building blocks of everything related to press and media. And that's really what I want to talk about today. So let's launch into the session. So this is really a Press 101, how to get the basics right. So we're going to run through 4 main aspects of doing that. First is really the question and answering the question, what makes news news? Secondly is creating relationships with the press and priming them to report on your stories. Third, communicating your message. And fourth, and finally, pitching your stories before hopefully we have some time for questions at the end of this. And before I get into it, I do want to say that Rupert Evelyn will be giving a talk later where he's going to be going much deeper into principles of press, narrative, delivering stories, and I'd encourage everyone to attend that session as well. His one will build quite well on the basics that I'm going to be talking about today. So yeah, this is an open question to the room. We've got quite a small room, so you probably just shout out, what makes news news? Anyone just go for it, don't be shy. Controversy, yeah. Anyone else? Sparks interest, yep, something that people look and they're like, wow, what is that? Yep. Anyone else want to add in? Fear? Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit? So this, proximity aspect, it affects them personally. Yeah, that's an absolutely great one. Maybe one more? Virality, yeah, shareability. Can you create a story that people are going to want to hit that share button, going to want to hit that like button as well? So yeah, great answers, everyone. So for me, there's 3 main things that make news news, and it wraps up basically everything that you guys have already been saying. First of all, things that everyone cares about. There is a reason that the weather is on the news multiple times a day, every single day. It might sound silly, it might sound very basic, but it's because it affects every single one of us. That is why it is there. Also, secondly, if you go and block the busiest motorway in the country, it affects a lot of people. The media are going to cover it. They're not going to cover it if you go and block a random C road in the middle of Shropshire, are they? No one really cares about that. They care when you block motorways, they care when you block roads in central London. But it's not just thinking on a national level with this, it's thinking within the scope of what you or your organization is trying to do. So if you're thinking on a local level, maybe you're trying to, shut down the planning permission for a local zoo, and you talk about it being built on greenbelt land, which is something that demonstrably the British public cares about. It's something that affects everyone in that local area. You might think regional, you might think national. All of this is going to stem from what your organization's theory of change is, or your resources. For Animal Rising, what this looked like for us was targeting the biggest horse race in the world and attempting to disrupt it, doing so for 15 minutes. Other things include, again, Just Stop Oil, going and sitting on roads in central London, going and being outside politicians' houses, anything that a lot of people care about or impacts a lot of people. If you can insert yourself into that, that is what creates news. Secondly, is all things wild and wacky, and that's Robbie's point about virality is really coming to the surface there. So this top one from Speciesism, which I think was a fantastic action, because people look at it and they're like, what on earth is this? It activates that curiosity in people. Secondly, Just Stop Oil, very, very little media coverage through the first half of 2022, where about 1,000 people, went and blocked like oil depots in the southeast and in the Midlands, thousands of arrests. Then they block roads in central London. It does quite well, but you chuck 2 tins of Heinz tomato soup on a Van Gogh and you get 60 million views on Twitter, and the world is talking about you. So whilst things that impact a lot of people that care about is one way to do it, you can do it by targeting things and thinking outside the box on things as well. So one thing I put here is it's about getting outside of our bubble of like what we find interesting and what we think people are going to find interesting. Put yourself in the shoes of someone else, a member of the public, who's probably seen, if they live in a major city, a Cube of Truth, AV, that sort of thing. Get outside the box, think like, what are the weird and wacky things that I can do that are going to grab that attention? And again, I'd really encourage people to talk to Speciesism about this. I was chatting to them last night. They've got some really good things planned coming up soon that are doing exactly this. And lastly, and this leads me on to talking about building those relationships with journalists, is reverse engineer what it is the media wants. So it might be quite a common misconception that the news, the media is there just to report on stuff. They just do it willy-nilly. They don't really think about it. It's like, anything that comes in, we'll do it. But you have to go deeper than that and understand that various outlets have different editorial directions and wants. The Daily Mail is going to want something wildly different to what The Guardian wants. They're going to want something completely different to what Plant-Based News wants, for example. So it's about meeting those journalists, grabbing coffee, grabbing lunch with them, and asking them, what are the stories that you want? How can I make news that appeals to you? Now, a really good example of this is on the screen here. It's from our Plant-Based Universities campaign, where we were nominated for Prince William's Earthshot Prize last year. So on the face of it, it's like environmental award, David Attenborough, like NGOs, that sort of thing. But we decided to take that and turn it into a royal story rather than an environmental story. And you can imagine that there's like a little bit of controversy, a little bit of fuss get kicked up when it's like, vegan activists have been nominated for a Royal Associated Award. So we did that, and we got some really great coverage from the Telegraph's deputy royal editor. Nothing to do with environment, nothing to do with animal rights, but it got that message across because we understood this is a story that this outlet and this particular journalist is looking for, and we work back from there rather than our side of thinking, we've got a great story, let's get it to the world. It's what makes a story for the journalist, how do we make that? And as I said, that leads us on to talking about, creating relationships with journalists that enables you to prime them for the stories that you're going to be releasing. So why do we want to do this? First of all, again, find out what makes that journalist tick, find out what makes the outlet tick. What's the editorial direction? What are the topics that they know they're going to get a go-ahead on, for example? Then personal relationships, they really, really matter. I think that old saying of it's not what you know, it's who you know, is very true when we talk about the press and the media. So it's swelling in capacity. Knowing a journalist can make the difference between the story being reported and not. If they quite like you as a person, they're going to report on you more likely than if they don't like you as a person, if they don't know you as a person. And what this also does is, beyond just the story that you might be pitching to them, it builds your organizations and your personal credibility on this particular issue. It makes you a go-to source for comment, for story, when they might have had a meeting with their editor on the Monday who says, all right, we've got space for an animal story this week. We've got space for a story about farms this week. They're like, oh, I know so-and-so from this group. I'm going to go and talk to them and see if they've got anything for me. And you'll be surprised how often this happens once you start doing it. Now, How do you do this? It might seem a bit daunting, but it's just about putting yourself out there, basically. Journalists live on X, or Twitter as it was formerly known. And as you can see on the right-hand side here, this is Greg Wood, who is the racing correspondent for The Guardian. Very clear in his bio what he is, what he does, what he's interested in. And you can just build on that, basically. Most journalists will have their direct messages open on Twitter. And if you've got a story ready for them, just get in the DMs and say, hi, I'm so-and-so from so-and-so. I'd love to talk to you about a story that I've got. And that opens that conversation where you can ask them, have you got time to go to coffee? Have you got time for lunch? Then you can talk about this story, expand beyond that, and ask them the questions that they want to be asked and find out about them as well. You'd be very interested that a lot of journalists, they're so used to being the ones asking the question that when you stop them and be like, what do you want? What got you into journalism? And building that personal connection, it really works, it really helps. And again, an example of doing this is on the screen here. So yeah, as hopefully you'll all have seen, Animal Rising, we very publicly said we're not going back to the Grand National this year. And the way that we got that out into the world is Greg here, who, even though he's a horse racing correspondent, he's a horse racing fan, he is actually a very nice guy. I get along with him quite well. Picked up the phone, had a half an hour chat with him, said, all right, Greg, we're not going to be going to the Grand National this year. Would you like to be the journalist that breaks that news? And he practically rips my arm off because we've got that relationship. It's a great story for him, not only for a sports story, but also national news, as we know last year, was absolutely huge. And perhaps if we'd just done a press release, we'd just blasted this out to the world, it wouldn't have got much traction. But by getting that story in the bag with a journalist who we know is going to give us a pretty fair hearing, going to be printing perhaps 10, 11 lines verbatim quoted from us in the piece, we get that message across and we guarantee the story that they were very excited about. And they always tell if they're putting exclusively or exclusive by that they think it's a great story as well. And that's another aspect of building relationships with journalists is you get into exclusives and that's what they care about. If they're the one that is telling the world this story, it goes way up in their estimation. Grand. So moving on from that to communicating our message and how we do that effectively, the very first thing that you need to do is find your hook. And to explain that, I think it's useful to pitch basically a scenario to you all. I'm going to talk you through it. If you want to close your eyes, fine. If you want to keep them open, go for it. So imagine that you are a journalist. You've maybe only been working for a newspaper for a year and a half. You're working 50, 60, 70-hour weeks. Your editor is expecting you to be getting 7 or 8 stories out a day. You finished work at 11:30 last night. You've got back into the office. It's 8:30 in the morning. You've had, 5, 6 hours sleep. You open up your email inbox and you've got 200 unread emails, 50 of which have already come in before you've reached the office this morning. There might be someone going on about the UFO that they've seen in their garden. It might be your editor chasing you for something to do with yesterday's story. What are the email headers that are going to stick out to you when you're at the start of the day thinking, I don't want to be leaving the office at 11:30 tonight again? And that is what your hook needs to be. It is the thing that is going to be in that email header, going to be in the opening of your text message to a journalist that actually makes them open it, actually makes them click on it. Because press really is an industry that moves at the speed of sound. So the very core of your story needs to be something you can boil into a sentence and it can be eye-catching. Great example here is from Animal Equality. And if anyone wants to see what a good press work looks like, go and look at Abby and what AE are doing. It's incredible, the link that they've got with the Times especially, is lice-infested aquatic prisons. Chris Packham calls for fish farm boycott. You've got a celebrity name in there. First of all, you've got a celebrity saying something quite controversial. You've got something in farming and hygiene that a lot of the public care about because they're like, what, am I eating this? Am I eating fish that's infested with lice and with insects? And then secondly, below that is from our Plant-Based for Universities campaign back last year, is hundreds of academics call for 100% plant-based meals at UK universities. Again, hitting a lot of those tick boxes for what makes a story. Hundreds of academics, something that people care about. UK universities, again, a lot of us are invested in the university system, and there's very radical, bold, out there, 100% plant-based meals as well. So when we're thinking about stories, thinking about how we're going to get something out there, find your hook, first of all, and then everything works back from that. Cool, so now moving on to the more information-dense part of this is, beyond your hook, how do you communicate your message? And it's something that we forget to do a lot of the time in the movement, is we actually need to get stuff down on paper for someone to read and to be able to understand. And that is where press releases come in. An example on the left-hand side from us last year from the lambs rescue at Sandringham Royal Estate. So we'll kind of work through it step by step, and then I will be leaving space at the end for questions anyway if people want to ask about this. So first of all is your headline, 10 to 12 words maximum, and without sounding crude, without sounding like I'm lying a little bit, you want to push the barriers of truth as far as they will go. You want clickbait, because again, imagine you're in the shoes of a journalist who's got 200 unopened emails in their inbox. You want to be the email that sticks out. You want to be the person texting them that sticks out. Secondly, high quality photo that tells the story of the action. You can see on the left-hand side here, the photo does the work that the headline is doing as well. You can tell exactly what is happening. Got the Animal Rising t-shirts on. They've got the 3 lambs, happy smiling, in the back of the van, whisking them away to a sanctuary and safety. Now I'll pause here to say that headline and photo, if you don't have these spot on, journalists are not going to read on. They don't care what else is in the piece if they haven't been taken in by the headline and the photo. So in terms of priorities, in terms of your effort, get those two right before you think about absolutely anything else. Especially in today's digital media age, getting that content, whether that's photo, especially video, as well to newspapers. You know, the Daily Mail love to have 20, 30-second clips on their website, especially. A lot of newspapers, they will now do like digital content exclusives and start to rival broadcast media for video and not just photo. So yeah, moving on from that is bullet points to get brute facts of the situation across. Have to remember that a press release is a communication of facts through our lens. It's not an opinion piece, it's not a feature, not an op-ed, communication of facts through our lens. So we do need to get just the brute facts of a situation across. So that's names of people, locations, dates, times, concretely what has actually happened, those sorts of things. And doing this actually frees up a lot of space later in a press release to be weaving your narrative and story into it, which is where we move on to a kind of short introduction. And that's where we actually want to bring in our framing into it and our element of the story. Then moving on, quotes as well, always great because you know that these are going to be verbatim printed in newspapers, online. It's not just that a journalist is going to take it and then write what they think about it. Quotes are actually going to be there, so you want them to be short, snappy, and hard-hitting, fast first-person commentary. You want them to be eye-catching and to get attention. And one that we've kind of worked with the Grand National is really pushing the imagery of the Jockey Club hanging themselves in public and the blood of the horses that died yesterday being on the hands of the Jockey Club. That's shocking to people, and that's visual to people when they see it. And this is our opportunity to get that first-person narrative and commentary across. And then moving on, bringing in those further details to expand and supplement your introductions. So for example, if you're writing an environmental piece about food, if you want an environmental story about food, you might talk about University of Oxford study in 2018 said that 76% of global farmland could be freed up by a global transition to a plant-based food system. Very reputable source, very eye-catching statistic, and it backs your argument if that's the one that you're making. Then moving on, another quote. And again, it's about making short, snappy, hard-hitting commentary, but give it a bit of variety. You know, perhaps your first quote might have leaned very heavy into an environmental viewpoint. Your second might lean into animal rights or health. Give it something different and make sure they're coming from people with different backgrounds as well. Say your first quote might be coming from, unemployed student. Your second quote might be coming from a doctor or someone in a very professional, respectable job as well, because we want to hit all bases here. And to wrap up, background information, and something that we forget very often is to include an overview of the organization that we're representing or that we're writing on behalf of. Because sadly, most journalists have not heard of you. Most journalists have not heard of us as Animal Rising, to be honest, so do not take it personally. So they need to know about you. Because most journalists are generalists. They might have just been assigned your story. They might have just seen your email come in and thought, oh, that's interesting. I think I could get this past my editor. Then lastly, again, contact details is giving away for people to follow up with you. Imagine that you have this incredible story and you've sent it out to the press or you've put it on Twitter and they don't have a way to get in contact with you and Good Morning Britain wants to have you on tomorrow. They can't email you if they can't ring you. That doesn't happen and you've missed that opportunity. And also giving people a way to fact check any claims that you've made, giving people a way to get more from you and build those relationships with journalists. And briefly, just some general do's and don'ts when you're trying to write a press release, when you're trying to hash things together, is we're not aiming for the vegan communist manifesto here. We're not writing 5, 6, 7,000 words for a journalist. We're trying to aim for 500 words, absolute maximum. Because as I've said, they are very overworked. They're very underpaid. They want to get these stories out quickly, but also with high quality as well. So that's why we still, again, have to focus on getting that incredible headline and photo in and make that fact-checking easy for them. I can count on both hands the amount of press releases that I've seen where people claim things as facts and they don't provide any justification for it whatsoever. A lot of what you're saying might be absolutely 100% true, but if you don't give a journalist an independent way of verifying that, they can't print it. They've got incredibly high burdens of truth. They can be sued for this sort of thing if they put something in their paper and it is not factually correct. So providing that link to that journal, that academic paper, that study is absolutely vital to making sure that your piece can make it through. And lastly, keep your language simple. Does anyone want to shout out and guess what the average reading age of someone in the UK is? 8. So we're in the middle, we're 9. 9 is the average reading age of an adult in the UK. So that is who we need to write for. That is who our language needs to reflect in terms of capability. So don't go on and get into like some PhD quality thesis debate. We want to be keeping it plain. We want to be keeping it simple. And don'ts is we're not building up to a crescendo. This isn't a musical. This isn't a play. This isn't a movie where everything gets found out at the end. And we've got like Poirot going and like saying, oh, this happened. What we're doing is getting that out straight away because that is what we draw the journalist in with. That is the hook that gets them to click on the article, on the press release that we've done. And linking to that is don't be tempted to go on a tangent. You've got 350 to 500 words here. You're not writing a book. You're not bringing in lots of plot lines, lots of storylines. You want to keep your core messages, like 1 to 3 of them, very simple, and you want to absolutely hammer them home. Repetition is incredibly important. Something that I was told that is very helpful is when you're getting a message across, when you're just about tired of repeating it, is the first time that it's actually getting through to the person that you're talking to. So we need to get things across simply, clearly, and repeatedly to make sure they stick in the minds of the public. Third, linked to that fact-checking, is don't be tempted to state opinions as facts or make claims that you can't substantiate. You need to differentiate very clearly between things that you're saying, it is this, or I'm saying this, or the group is saying this, or the group is claiming that. This makes it so much easier for a journalist to understand, okay, what is it I need to give links to my editor to confirm, etc., etc. And lastly, don't stay in the animal rights bubble. Like, as Matthew Glover was saying, we're like 1%, 1.5% of the population. So the things that might hit home for us, they might appeal to us, don't necessarily appeal to the other 98.5% and 0.5% of people. Want to get out and talk about the things that they matter about, talking about cruelty on farms, on this particular farm, or animal rights issues, or doing a Q of truth, we might think is super interesting, super important. But to be frank, the general public does not. So it's about finding the things that are going to resonate with them rather than resonate with us. Oh, I'm actually doing great for time. That's a first. Cool. And lastly, moving on to talking about pitching a story to a journalist. So spent some time there talking about how to craft a fantastic press release. Sadly, that's only the first part of the work. The next is actually getting it into the hands of journalists as well. So how do we do that? How do we make a great pitch? And the keys to it are to the point. Again, repeating the fact that journalists, they are overworked and underpaid, or they're just plain lazy. That's Not the majority of the time though, but it's getting your points across very simply and in an eye-catching way. So you're crafting it to appeal to the journalist or the outlet. So if you're, for example, going for royal reporters, you want to really hype up the royal angle. If you are talking to, I know, Jane Delton from The Independent, who does a lot of animal rights stories, you can go hard on the animal rights angle. If you are talking to, I know, someone from the Daily Mail, you want to go heavy on a controversy angle, something that the public can get really be in their bonnet about, basically. Really identify who is it you're speaking to, what appeals to them, what is going to make them write a story for their newspaper. And lastly is always keeping that door open. Is super friendly. Can I give you any further comments? Can I give you comments just for your newspaper? Can I set you up to chat with one of the people who was involved in this action, who did this farm investigation? That sort of thing. And then naturally is always actually put your press release in the pitch as well. You don't just email a journalist saying, I've got this great story for you, blah, blah, blah. And then they email back saying, oh, that's great. Where's the story in your email? I haven't got time for this, basically. So it's always giving them everything on a plate, making it as easy as possible for them. So that brings me to the end of what I wanted to talk about today. As I said at the start, Press 101, the basics, the building blocks, is where everything else comes from. You don't need to be an expert. You don't need that journalism degree. You don't need to have spent thousands of pounds on courses to be able to do this. Just being willing to work hard and to learn. And the extension of that is, if you're thinking about an organization that you're part of, is be prepared to both spend time and money equipping your press team for success. Press is 24/7 every week of the year, every year of the decade, and so on. You need a team that is equipped to deal with that. And if you want to take it seriously, this includes forking out for databases so you have the contacts of journalists. It includes making time and money in a budget to go and talk to journalists, to get coffee, to get lunch with them, to build these relationships. It's something that we need to take with the utmost seriousness and get out sometimes of this grassroots energy of, we can just kind of botch everything, we can make everything work. Because the media is a very professional industry, and if we don't come with that same professional face, we're not taken seriously. It kind of moves me on to saying, get out of your bubble and talk to the media. Again, harking back to something Matthew said earlier in his keynote speeches, we spend a lot of time thinking and not a lot of time doing. Time spent learning about what a journalist wants, time spent speaking to a journalist is never time wasted. Even if the story doesn't materialize, even if nothing gets to print, you have done it and you've got experience doing it, and you can be better next time. Now, I was terrified the first time that I was like, I actually don't need to go and take a journalist out for coffee. I need to have lunch with them. What do I say? What do I do? And now I'm sit down with them. It's absolutely fine. So it's really something you can build over time and you can get better at. And last thing I'll leave it on is quite similar to what I've just said, is in all of this, put your best foot forward and be professional. Take this seriously and you will get rewards out of it. That's me. And I think we've got time for questions.
One thing I have learned, and maybe you can mention this, is you need to get your sentence down with your points in a sound bite that is no longer than 13 seconds. Do you want to talk about that?
So there's actually a very easily memorable, is 3-9-27 for doing that. It's 3 points, 9 seconds, 27 words, I think it is. And it's how do you effectively get your point across very, very quickly? Because if we're talking to the media, again, it's look at a newspaper, they've got 3 lines of quote from us, or if it's a pre-recorded interview, it's 15, 20 seconds from us. So yeah, absolutely, boiling it down into its essence is super important, yeah. So
an example that would be animal testing is outdated, cruel, and unnecessary. So so they say, hey, what are you doing here today? And then you answer with your quick soundbite. And I just want to say congratulations for all of your media. I was impressed with it in the United States. I was watching it in the Daily Mail and all, because it really does make a huge difference influencing the major populations in an article rather than even an ad. So I really want to say congratulations. I'm speaking at 11:15 upstairs, but I wanted to come down here. I really wanted to hear what you had to say because it's a great success that you have created. And I can see it's because of your professionalism and your focus. So I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Thank you, that's very kind. And I remember seeing when we poured milk all over the floor of a supermarket, it was on like Fox News in America. And one of our funders saw it. They got quite worried about it because they thought it was just like crazy bunch of vegans. Who am I giving money to? But yeah, it worked well.
And the fountains of blood. Was it you that did
yes,
the fountains
yeah,
of
that
blood?
was before my time, actually.
Memorable.
Cool. We'll move on. We'll just cycle around the room. I've lost count of who was first.
Hey, great talk. Thank you for doing that. So my question is it really that easy to reach out to journalists? Because when I was first thinking about doing this myself, I thought that I'd have to look at the journalist page, look at the very bottom and see where they're running and yoga, and that I would have to go running every week to find them, or I'd have to go to every yoga studio in my hometown to find them and to get their attention. So is it really as easy as just messaging them?
So I'd say the worst that they can say is no, right? I don't have the time, I'm not interested in this. But what I would say is don't just message journalists out of nowhere. Always message them with something to talk about. So when you've got a story, that's the right time to message a journalist. So for example, last year when we knew we were going to do the Grand National, I was like, all right, hey, do you want me to let you in on the fact that we're going to disrupt the Grand National this year? Before it was on the front page of the Daily Mail, before we did it, of course. But that sort of thing is make sure that you've got the story ready. You've got your first talking point, because that's the way that you get sat down with them and you can say, all right, this is what else we're doing this year. This is what we've got coming up in the next few months. What are the sorts of things that you want to report on? What are the sort of things that appeal to you? But having that, it's kind of like getting your foot in the door, basically, with having that pre-prepared thing that you want to talk to them about, and being willing to, message, DM 15, 20 journalists and one of them replies. That's just the way it works.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Sam March. I'm a criminal barrister. I had a question because representing activists is very different from representing a lot of other people who are in the criminal justice system, because most people just want their cases to go away as quietly as possible. Activists very often quite loudly admit what they've done and want as many people as possible to hear about it. Are there ways that your activists, lawyers or legal teams can change the way that we help you on cases when your aims are actually making headlines, not necessarily getting acquitted?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And as we've seen a lot of trials happening recently, Just Stop Oil, Legislate Britain, Animal Rising, that has become a much more important thing. One thing I'd say is, firstly, understanding the way that media law works around trials and that sort of thing. Is the media can't report on it before it happens, prejudice a jury, prejudice a magistrate. But when we talk about in the courtroom and afterwards, is having people that have this as their goal and I want to say this particular thing in court because I know that it's going to be recorded as a matter of fact, and I can go to the media and say, this is what was said in the courtroom. And beyond that is working with barristers like yourselves, because if you're willing to be named as someone who was a representative of someone, then we've given a fact-checking mechanism. We might claim that X was said in the courtroom, but if we've got no one of an independent status in the courtroom to confirm what was said, then the story fizzles out. So that's really helpful, as well as having barristers, having solicitors who are willing to not give a quote, not give a statement even, but to be listed as someone who can be approached for comment, can be approached for fact-checking. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Verity. I'm here with the Freedom Food Alliance, and we deal a lot with challenging dis and misinformation in the media. I'm interested on your point around equipping your team for success, particularly in the media landscape, and if you have any particular advice about dealing with constantly being involved in the media space and how you make sure your team don't get burnt out and overwhelmed with the constant moving cycles of this particular industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very fair point. Like working in the media or social media as well, you're on the front lines. You see this every single day. So what we try to do is find a way to celebrate the victory in everything that we do. So even, last year is a great example of we could have let the expose about the Grand National absolutely crush us on the 2nd of April before we'd even done the action. And again, this came from the fact that like 6 of us got on Zoom at 3 o'clock in the morning and spent like 4 hours talking about this. It was horrible. And we were like, how do we spin this basically? Like, how do we become Alistair Campbell in the thick of it and turn this into a positive? And what we did was like, we're just going to lean into the publicity. We're just going to understand that a lot of things have been put in motion. We need to deal with it. But then more concretely on the burnout side of it is acknowledging that if you're someone who is leading a team like this, your responsibilities aren't merely professional. It's not just about getting those clicks, getting those media pieces. You have a pastoral responsibility to your team as well. So within a lot of organizations, support teams, HR teams, them being actively involved in this as well, checking in with people to make sure that they're all right, especially your spokespeople as well, the people who are going to be the ones hounded on social media, getting the death threats sometimes when you go and talk to Piers Morgan, for example. Yeah, that was kind of a lame answer, but hopefully it helped.
No, it was great. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, we've got time for 1 or 2 more questions.
I think right down at the front.
Yep, the front.
Thank you, Barbara and Mo Think Tank. I was curious about when you talked about the pitch. When you send a pitch, you attach the release in the email, but then you send the same release and change the pitch according to the news, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So sometimes, and there's really good PR software out there that does cost a fair bit of money, but if you're an organization with budget, highly recommend it, where you can send like a few hundred emails in the blink of an eye, and that's your kind of cover or your broad strokes, where you send it just anyone who's reported on you in the past, just your average reporter, but it's the reporters who you want to build a relationship with, that you spend the time crafting that pitch for. You link the same release and that sort of thing, but you might add things that aren't in your press release into that pitch. So an extra quote or an extra, I don't know, Countryside Alliance hates us kind of thing, because that works really well with the Daily Mail because they love conflict, basically, as an example.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for this. I'm Rick Holland. I'm a fundraising consultant. I just wanted to comment that there's so much of what you talked about that's transferable to fundraising, building relationships with donors, remaining contactable, being human in those relationships. So I would think that with the success that you've had in the press with these kinds of stories really lends you and your team to success in fundraising as well.
Yeah, I really say that's a good point. And especially when we talk about pitching, when we talk about journalists, it's like almost you just have to put like your salesman hat on, basically, and view it as a sales job. You're selling a story to a journalist. You're on Dragon's Den trying to get investment from them in what you're talking about. Absolutely.